I have just discovered the Dalek voice changer app and I am in love with it. Unfortunately, even with the modulation, I don't think I sound particularly Dalek-y. I think I actually sound kind of more like a Cyberman through this. I think maybe you just have to be a man with the deep voice. Anyway, this is a channel about books, not about Doctor Who. Maybe one day I will make a channel about Doctor Who. But I'm going to talk about the books that I read in August. Now, I have hit my first reading slump of the year, which is pretty good. We're more than halfway through, but the, what was it called? That readathon that I did for 4 days in July. Not the booktubeathon, the other one. The cramathon. I read a lot during the cramathon, I think like 9 books in 4 days. But then that kind of sent me spiraling into a reading slump. So I didn't read that much outside of the cramathon in July, and I didn't read that much outside of the booktubeathon in August. I also did not do a wrap-up for July. That's because I read like one quarter of a book outside of the cramathon, and I feel like you guys had heard all of my thoughts on my cramathon books a lot. So I guess this is my July wrap-up as well. Outside of the cramathon, I listened to the audiobook of Emma by Charlotte Bronte, not Jane Austen. And this was the novel she was working on when she died. We only have the first 2 chapters and I listened to them on audiobook, so it was like half an hour worth of listening. And I actually really liked it. I don't really want to say much about the plot because since there's so little of it, like what you would normally say about a book counts as spoilers because like you've got so little to work with. But basically it's about a posh girl in a boarding school. Sound familiar? And there have been 2 instances of people completing the novel Emma. So if you have read either of those, please let me know. Let me know which one's better. But even if no one talks to me about this, I will probably seek out one of those for myself eventually. But going on to what I read in August, I listened to 3 audiobooks, read 1 novel, that was beautiful, and I read 1 short story. The first was Cousin Phyllis by Elizabeth Gaskell. I read this all the way at the beginning of the month, and so I can't really remember what happened. Also, not a lot happened. It was pretty dull. And I remember being disappointed by the ending. I've noticed this, I think like the older media gets, the less of a conclusion we have. Like a lot of movies from like the 30s don't have a conclusion, they just kind of stop. Go check out Flesh and the Devil or The Strange Woman if you want to see what I'm talking about. But I found the end of Cousin Phyllis like really dissatisfying. It's about like a guy who, I think he's a stonemason, and so he goes and he's like beginning his career, and then he meets up with his like mother's cousins or something in this town that he's moved to, and he befriends his cousin Phyllis, and she has an interesting life, sort of. Not really. You're killing me, Elizabeth Gaskell. I've read this and The Grey Woman, and they've both really disappointed me. Do I just have to go straight for the big stuff? Do I have to go straight for the North and South or the Wives and Daughters, or are those not going to be good as well? I don't know. Somebody who is an Elizabeth Gaskell expert, tell me, are Wives and Daughters and North and South worth it? Because right now I'm kind of feeling like not. I gave that 2 out of 5 stars. I also listened to it on LibriVox, or I downloaded it from LibriVox, where you can get free public domain recordings. So I will leave a link to that down there in case you want to listen to it, but you don't want to listen to it. Then I read Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. This is the 2nd book in the Witches sub-series of the Discworld series. As you all should know by now, I'm attempting to read the entire Discworld series this year, and I don't want to talk about it, okay? It's not going well, and I don't want to talk about it. This book was definitely better than Equal Rights and better than a fair number of the Rincewind novels. I found that the problem I had with some of the sort of middle Rincewind novels, Last Continent and Interesting Times, was that, like, I felt like the Act 1 or the exposition part took up like almost the entire story, and then the end didn't really have enough of a payoff. That was sort of the case with this one. It feels like just things are happening to get us introduced to the characters, introduced really well in this book. But then I found the end really was satisfying. I liked everything that happened to the bad guys and the good guys, and it was lovely. This is also the first book that Nanny Ogg is in, and she's always fun. Nanny Ogg is the reason that the Discworld series is adult and not young adult, because that is an old lady with a dirty mind. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Then I read Burning Girls by Victoria Chenoz. Sorry, it's Veronica Chenoz, isn't it? Yes, Veronica Chenoz. This is a short story, and I bought it for Kindle for like $1 or $2, but I think you can actually read it for free on Tor.com. I will investigate that, and if you can't, I will leave a link below. So Burning Girls is kind of following in the vein of The Golem and the Jinni, which is a book I read earlier this year and really enjoyed. You start out in Poland and you have a Jewish family, and this is in like 1890s, I think. And the real thing that makes it stand out is how seamlessly the magic is woven into the history. Like, it starts out with our main character, instead of spending the summer with her mom learning how to be a dressmaker, she gets taken out to the countryside to learn to be, like, there's a technical term for this, but basically witch doctor with her grandmother. And so since there were, like, actual witch doctory type people, like, that part doesn't seem fantastical, so you accept it, and then our main character starts learning, like, the names of God and elements of the Kabbalah and herb lore and stuff, and, like, people did learn that, and they thought that it worked, so that seems realistic, and, like, so by the time you get to where her magic is actually working, you just accept it. And it seems like it could totally have been real. But of course, they are Jews, and this is Poland in the late 19th century, so because of a pogrom, our main character, whose name I forgot, hold on. That's right, Deborah. So they end up doing the whole working in a factory in New York thing that a lot of immigrants did in the early 20th century. And so if you find that stuff interesting, I would definitely recommend this short story. Also, it's free, so I would recommend it. So yeah, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and the only thing I regret about this book is that I was reading it for the Booktubeathon challenge, read a book without letting go of it, so I had to hold on to my phone for the full, like, 40 minutes or whatever it was that it took me to read it, which means I couldn't Google some of the terms, because there are some, I believe, Yiddish terms in there that I did not know. So you may want to have Google handy when you read it. Then I listened to The Well-Beloved by Thomas Hardy. This is one of his lesser-known works. It's a novel of ingenuity as opposed to his novels of character and environment, which are his famous ones. It's about a man named Jocelyn Pierston. We first meet him when he's 20 years old, and he's just come back to his small Wessex hometown, all the typical Thomas Hardy things, after he's gotten an education in the big city. And he has sort of an awkward interaction with a young lady there, which ultimately ends up with him proposing marriage to her. And then some things happen that I'm not going to tell you about, but we then meet up with him again later when he's 40, and he goes back and meets the daughter of Avis Caro, that young lady from before, and then we meet up with him again when he's 60, when he meets the granddaughter of the original Avis Caro. But there was this little niggling thing while I was listening to this that I was not supposed to like Jocelyn. Jocelyn's whole deal is that he has this idealized, conceptual well-beloved, which is the thing that he is in love with. It's sort of his ideal woman, and different women at different times inhabit the well-beloved, or I suppose the well-beloved inhabits them. And this is handled in a very matter-of-fact way, definitely by Jocelyn, and also pretty much by Thomas Hardy himself. And I'm not sure if I like that or not. And one of Jocelyn's friends actually says this to him at some point. He says, like, you know, it sounds like you're just a playa and super fickle as a lover. Like, you can say you have this whole idealized, well-beloved thing, and, like, it's not your fault that, like, she happens to inhabit one woman and then another. But have you ever considered that you're just, like, a jerk? And so I don't know how I feel about Jocelyn and whether I'm okay with what he does. I would still recommend reading this story, even if you don't like the main character. There's still, like, I don't really care if I like the main character or not in a novel. I can read a book about a perfectly despicable person, and I have. The Meaning of Night. I recommend it. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Sorry, brief interlude while I recharge the camera. I should probably start checking that before I film. But the last book that I finished in August was another Thomas Hardy. It was The Woodlanders, which is a reasonably famous one. It's not, Chess of the D'Urbervilles, but people have read it. There was a movie made of it, and it's not like horribly depressing like Tess or Jude, so people can handle it. This and also The Well-Beloved I got as audiobooks from LibriVox, links below. I do actually recommend that you listen to these. I listened to these on my drive up and my drive back from upstate New York, and it was really nice to be listening to this while I was going through the rolling hills and the countryside and the farms. Even though The Woodlanders does take place in a woodland where there's trees everywhere. So this is a story about, there's kind of 6 main characters, but I guess our mainest character is a young lady named Grace who, stop me if this sounds familiar, has just come back to her small rural home after getting a fancy education. Thomas Hardy likes this kind of story. I think it's because that's how he felt, because he left his country home to go to London and be like an intellectual and a writer. And there's this whole complicated, like, love, there's mainly a love pentagon, but 2 of the elements of the pentagon have, like, other little tendrils coming off of them, so a whole lot of love and marriage going on. So, like, Grace and her childhood friend Giles Winterbourne kind of have a crush on each other, and her dad really wants Grace to marry Giles because he sort of cheated Giles's father out of a wife, so he's trying to make up for this. And then there's this other lady who is in love with Giles, and then unfortunately now Grace is like educated and fancy, so like she kind of feels and her father kind of feels that she's too good for Giles, so she ends up, well, I'm not going to tell you, but a whole bunch of romantic shenanigans. Also, Thomas Hardy does not shy away from clearly intimating that extramarital sex happens. That's kind of the hallmark of his late 19th century books. There aren't sex scenes, but you're like, yup, they were just doing it. And so for this reason, I would definitely recommend Thomas Hardy to people who want to like Jane Austen, but it just feels a little like frilly and silly to them. If you want to read sort of Jane Austen plotted type of books, but about poorer people and, and people, I don't know, whose humanness is more strongly realized, I would definitely recommend Thomas Hardy. I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was really good. Now, on to what I'm currently reading and going to be reading in the rest of September. Right now I'm reading 2 books. They're actually both post-apocalyptic, but I'm not getting them confused. They are rather different scenarios. One of them is the more sci-fi element, and that is The Girl with All the Gifts. I'm listening to this on audiobook. I actually paid for it. It's not free, so I cannot leave you a link below. I'm sorry. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm about halfway through, and for those of you who have read it, I've just sort of got to the big game changer where we have a big shift in setting, and so I'm a little bit concerned that it will become a different thing that I don't like anymore, but I trust the author, M.R. Carey. But yeah, you'll hear about that in a bit. And then I'm also reading Station 11. Station 11 is by Emily St. John Mandel. It is also post-apocalyptic. And again, we have a biological agent that has killed most of the people. I just finished chapter 21, so I'm in the second section about the post-flu era. And like at the beginning, I really liked it because I really liked our main character, Jeevan Chowdhury. And then we left him and went to the post-flu era, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And then we came back and we were looking at characters other than Jeevan, and I was bummed. But then I got to know Miranda, and now I'm like, wait, I really like Miranda. Don't take her away. So I'm less enamored of the post-flu sections, but I can sort of tell there's symbols and possibly people that are weaving their way between the two. So it seems very clever. Interested to see how it works out. Although I have to say, I don't really see how this can end. Like, it's not like they're gonna repopulate the Earth. It's not like our little caravan of actors is like trying to get to some safe haven where then everything will be at least moderately okay. And I really don't think Kirsten is going to die. I'm really not getting that vibe. And those are pretty much the 3 endings I can think of. So it may be more of a whimper than a shout sort of an end, and sometimes that can be okay. But I'll let you know. Actually, I won't let you know because that would be a spoiler. Maybe I'll do a spoilery review of this if people want me to. So I'm going to start my September by finishing those up, and then I also have the next 2 Terry Pratchett books, Witches Abroad and Lords and Ladies. And beyond that, I'm not really sure what I'm going to read. I'm just going to sort of take it as it comes. I am a substitute teacher, which means that in September my work starts up again, and like some days when I work, they pretty much just want me to give the students a piece of paper and then like ignore them. For the rest of class, or, you know, make sure they don't kill each other. And those days I get to read a lot. And then other days I'm like doing stuff all the time. So I have no idea how much time I'm going to have to read in September. So, you know, it might be just those 2 books, but we'll see. Okay, and then as a reward for those of you who have stayed to the end of the video, this is my new cat. Her name is Nova. Do you want to be famous on the internet, Nova? No? Not really. Okay. And for those of you who are aware of my other interests, yes, Nova is a reference to Nova from Dota 2.